The river was calm at first. Jake Mercer sat near the front of the canoe, his camera resting on his lap, fingers poised over the shutter button. He had spent weeks preparing for this expedition, mapping out the densest parts of the Amazon in search of the elusive harpy eagle. The bird was a living relic, a predator so powerful it could lift a small deer into the trees. If he could capture one perfect shot of it hunting, his documentary would be legendary. His guide, Mateo, paddled silently, his weathered hands steady on the oar. He had been raised in this jungle, and though he barely spoke, his eyes were always searching, watching for what outsiders couldn't see. Then, the wind shifted. Mateo's grip on the paddle tightened. Something was wrong. The river began to move faster, its once glass-like surface churning into ripples. The dense canopy above them rustled unnaturally, as if the jungle itself had taken a deep breath. And then, without warning, the sky exploded. A wall of rain came down so hard it sounded like bullets striking the water. The river, once peaceful, transformed into a monster. Jake barely had time to react. The canoe tilted violently. His camera slipped from his hands, tumbling into the water. He lunged for it. Stupid mistake. His sudden movement tipped the canoe further. Mateo shouted something in Spanish, a warning Jake never heard. Then came the impact. A hidden log, submerged just beneath the rapids, smashed into their canoe. The world flipped. Cold water rushed over Jake's head. He went under, tumbling violently, his limbs thrashing against unseen debris. The jungle, so loud just moments ago, was now muffled. He kicked desperately, lungs burning. His head broke the surface just in time to hear Mateo's scream. Then, silence. Mateo was gone. Jake washed up on the riverbank, gasping, coughing up muddy water. His body ached, bruises already forming from the impact of rocks and logs. Everything was gone. His backpack, his supplies, his satellite phone. The jungle had swallowed it all. He forced himself up, his soaked clothes clinging like dead weight. Everything hurt. His ribs, his arms, his head. He turned back toward the river, searching for any sign of Mateo. Nothing. The jungle, so alive just moments ago, had gone eerily silent. No birds, no buzzing insects, only the sound of water lapping at the shore. Then he heard it. A branch snapping. Jake froze. His breath hitched in his throat. Something was watching him. At first, he thought it was just his paranoia. The jungle was dense, full of shifting leaves and shadows. But then, another sound. Low, deep, a growl. He turned his head slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. Golden eyes gleamed from the undergrowth. A jaguar. It was stalking him, its massive muscular body perfectly still. Jake's mind screamed for him to run. But he knew better. Predators didn't chase unless their prey panicked. Slowly, carefully. He took a step back. The jaguar moved forward. A low, hungry rumble reverberated through its chest. Jake's body locked up. There was no escape. He had no weapon, no fire, no way to defend himself. The jaguar lowered itself into a crouch, ready to pounce. Then, something shifted in the trees above him. A massive dark shape swooped down from the canopy. The jaguar let out a startled snarl as a monstrous set of talons slashed at its back. Jake stumbled backward, his mind barely able to process what he was seeing. A harpy eagle. Its wingspan was enormous, easily over 7 feet. Its black and white feathers flared like a battle flag, and its yellow talons, each as long as a man's fingers, clamped onto the jaguar's spine. The jaguar let out a furious screech, twisting, snapping its jaws, but the eagle was too fast. It beat its powerful wings, sending dirt and leaves flying. The jaguar recoiled, its ears flattening, before bolting back into the trees, vanishing as quickly as it had come. Jake lay there, stunned. The harpy eagle landed on a gnarled branch above him. It stared at him, its dark eyes impossibly sharp. It had just saved his life. And now, it was watching. Jake shuddered. Was it deciding if he was prey too? He didn't know. But he did know one thing. This bird was not leaving him alone. Jake sat beneath the twisted roots of a massive kapok tree, his body shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. His hands were still clenched, his nails digging into his palms. The harpy eagle remained perched above him, unmoving, watching. He had heard stories about this bird, the jungle's silent ruler, the ghost in the canopy. But never had he seen one up close, let alone witnessed it drive off a jaguar. His logical mind fought to make sense of it. Why didn't it just leave? Why was it still here? A low rumble of hunger twisted his stomach, pulling him back to his immediate crisis. The jungle was not a place for rest. Jake needed water, food, shelter. If he didn't start moving soon, the jungle would consume him. He took a shaky breath and forced himself up. The eagle let out a low, guttural sound, something between a warning and a command. Jake ignored it. He had to survive. With no compass, no GPS, he relied on the sun to guide him. He walked for hours, cutting through thick vegetation, his legs growing weaker with every step. The jungle didn't care. Vines snagged at his boots. Insects swarmed his face, biting through his sweat-drenched clothes. Every leaf seemed to whisper threats, and worst of all, the hunger. He hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. His stomach ached with emptiness, his head pounding with dehydration. Then he heard it, the faint trickle of water. Jake nearly collapsed in relief. He followed the sound desperately, stumbling towards salvation. When he finally reached the stream, he fell to his knees, scooping up handfuls of water. It was clear, cold, pure survival. And then, a shadow passed overhead. He looked up. The harpy eagle was there, still following him, still watching. Jake wiped his mouth and stared back at it. Was it coincidence? Some strange animal curiosity? Or was it something more? Either way, he wasn't alone in this jungle, and right now, he needed every advantage he could get. He moved on, following the stream, hoping it would lead to a clearing, maybe even signs of civilization. That hope shattered within an hour. He stepped too close to a rotting log and immediately felt the sharp, burning sting. A flash of green scales, slit-pupiled eyes, and a coil tightening around his ankle. A fer-de-lance, one of the deadliest vipers in the Amazon. The strike was instantaneous. Pain ripped through his leg like wildfire. Jake let out a strangled scream, staggering backward, his vision already starting to blur. He had seconds, maybe minutes. The venom was fast. His hands fumbled for anything, a rock, a branch. But his limbs weren't working right. His body felt slow, heavy. He fell to the ground, his pulse hammering. This was it. This was how he was going to die. Then, the harpy eagle moved. With an earth-shaking whoosh of air, the eagle descended from the canopy like a missile. Its talons locked around the viper's body, crushing it instantly. The snake thrashed violently, but it was already over. The eagle lifted it effortlessly, carrying the lifeless serpent back into the trees. Jake could barely keep his eyes open. The venom was working fast. His limbs felt like lead. His breathing grew shallow. The jungle blurred into darkness, his last thought before he blacked out. Would the eagle save him one more time? Darkness. Jake floated in and out of consciousness. His body felt like it was sinking into the earth, each breath ragged, shallow. The venom had done its job. A slow, agonizing burn crawled up his leg, twisting into his muscles. His vision was a blur of green and black, his mind slipping between reality and fevered hallucinations. He was dying. Then came the sound, a loud, piercing cry that cut through the suffocating jungle silence. Jake's eyes flickered open. Above him, perched on a broken branch, was the harpy eagle, still here, still watching. But this time, it didn't just observe. It moved. The massive bird descended, its enormous wings fanning the dirt around him. Its razor-sharp talons gripped something in its clutch, the dead fer-de-lance viper it had killed. Jake barely registered it before the eagle threw the snake's mangled body onto his chest. He blinked, trying to understand. His brain was fogged with pain, but instinct, some deep primal instinct, kicked in. The harpy eagle was telling him something, and then it clicked. The venom. The indigenous tribes of the Amazon knew the cure to a fer-de-lance bite, and Jake had read about it in his research. The viper itself held the key. His hands trembled as he reached for the snake's mutilated body. His fingers fumbled, weak, but he forced himself to focus. If he didn't act now, he was already dead. The method was primitive, brutal. Jake reached for the snake's bile duct, knowing that some indigenous people used the venom's proteins to counteract its own effects. A desperate, insane move. But it was all he had. He squeezed the last remnants of the viper's own venom onto his wound. The jungle tilted violently. A sudden, blinding pain shot through his leg, up his spine, into his skull. He screamed, his body arched, convulsing, every nerve exploding with fire. But then, clarity. The numbness in his limbs didn't spread. His heart rate, though pounding, didn't flatline. The venom wasn't killing him anymore. He had just saved his own life, and the eagle had guided him to it. It took hours for Jake to regain control of his body. When he finally managed to push himself upright, drenched in sweat and half delirious, he realized the eagle was still there. It hadn't left, not once. But why? Jake forced himself to his feet, using the tree for support. The harpy eagle let out another cry. But this one was different, urgent. Jake staggered forward, and the eagle took off into the trees, gliding low. It was leading him. Again. He followed. Through thick tangled vines, through the suffocating heat, through the never-ending maze of the Amazon. He moved blindly, trusting the bird. And then, he smelled it. Smoke. Jake stumbled into a clearing. His relief died instantly. The jungle was burning. A thick column of smoke curled into the sky, the crackling of flames tearing through the underbrush. And there, just beyond the fire, was the impossible. A rescue team. His rescue team. They had been searching for him. They were here, but the fire was between them. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps. His body screamed for rest, water, safety. But he couldn't stop now. The harpy eagle circles above him, its massive wings casting shadows over the flames. Jake watches as it dives through the smoke, taking to the skies beyond. And in that moment, he knows what he has to do. If he didn't run now, he would die here. With one last burst of strength, he charges toward the fire. The heat slashes at his skin. His lungs burn with every breath. But then, he sees them. The rescue team sees him too. Shouts fill the air, hands reach for him. And just before the fire consumes the clearing, they pull him to safety. When Jake wakes up, he is on a boat, heading back towards civilization. The jungle is behind him now, but he can't shake the feeling that something has been left unfinished. As he stares at the distant canopy, he whispers, "Thank you." Somewhere, deep within the jungle, a shadow moves through the trees, watching, always watching. Jake sat on the edge of the rescue boat, his hands gripping the splintered wooden railing. His body ached in ways he couldn't describe. The pain wasn't just in his battered limbs, the venom-wrecked muscles, or the burns on his skin. It was deeper than that. He wasn't supposed to survive. The Amazon had tried to swallow him whole, and against all odds, he had crawled back out. The harpy eagle, it had saved him, had guided him, and now it was gone. The motor of the rescue boat growled as it carved through the river, taking him back towards civilization, toward safety, toward home. So why did it feel so wrong? He turned back, staring at the jungle shrinking into the distance. The green canopy rippled like a living thing, as if it breathed in unison with the river. And then, he saw it. High above the trees, perched on the tallest gnarled branch, was the harpy eagle, watching him. Jake felt his chest tighten. There was something final in the way it sat there, wings tucked close to its body, its head slightly tilted as if it knew. This was goodbye. Then, it lifted its wings. The wind caught beneath its feathers, sending ripples through the branches. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. And the harpy eagle took flight, higher and higher, until it was nothing more than a dark speck against the gray sky. Jake's fingers clenched, and then the boat's engine sputtered. The world lurched beneath him. The river roared louder, not because of the boat's motor, but because the current had suddenly shifted. Something was pulling them back. The rescuers shouted in Spanish, scrambling toward the controls, frantically trying to restart the engine. Jake stood up too fast. His vision swam, but his instinct screamed at him. Something was wrong. He turned back toward the jungle and froze. The jungle was gone. Not just fading in the distance, completely gone. The river stretched endlessly in both directions, but the towering green walls of trees had vanished. It was as if they had never been there at all. Jake's breath came in short, panicked gasps. His mind fought to make sense of it. Where were they? One of the rescuers swore under his breath, looking at his compass, then immediately dropped it, his face draining of color. Jake stumbled forward, grabbing the device before it could roll off the boat. The needle was spinning wildly. No north, no direction, just chaos. The sun, which had been above them just moments ago, had shifted position. The light was dimming too fast, not like a normal sunset, but as if something was closing in. The wind carried a sound that made Jake's blood turn to ice. It was not the jungle, not the birds, not even the water. It was whispers. Low, distant, 1,000 voices overlapping in a language he didn't understand. The rescuers were yelling now. One of them jumped into the water, trying to swim away. But there was nowhere to go. Jake finally understood. He had left the jungle, but the jungle had not left him. He wasn't supposed to survive, and it was taking him back. The whispers grew deafening. The water turned black, and just as Jake opened his mouth to scream, the jungle swallowed him whole. The boat was found. Days later, adrift, no crew, no bodies, just Jake's camera lying on the floorboards, the last photo on it. A harpy eagle, staring directly into the lens, and in its dark, endless eyes, a reflection of the jungle that was waiting.